The Man in the Black Coat by AdrianDunmore. Hello, you listeners out there. For a long time, I have read ghost stories on here and on other sites, but I've also had a few experiences and I wanted to write them down and share them with you. Now, the following story sounds really unbelievable. If you don't believe me, and if some of you have your doubts, that's okay and understandable. I honestly can't blame you for it, but let's get started. It all began when I was a child. My childhood wasn't very great in the beginning because my father was, and is probably still, a total monster and asshole. He was often drunk and he beat my mother. Finally, she decided to run away from him. She took me with her because she didn't want to leave me with him alone. We packed up our stuff, and when he was at work, we ran from him. We fled to my grandma and aunts. They lived in a village far away from our old home, but there we were safe, so it was the first time that I met them, and I quickly fell in love with both of them. They were really nice and cool people, a bit weird on first sight because of their hobbies. They were both interested in occultism and magic and witchcraft. Even the house they lived in looked magical. It was old and beautiful, but at night it could be scary. But soon I began to feel very comfortable in that house. My mother, on the other hand, didn't like it at all. She was still afraid that my father could find us, and she hated the occult stuff, even though she'd grown up with it. My family was not usual. My grandma told me stories that her ancestors were magicians and witches. My grandpa, who I have never met because he died a long time before my birth, was a demonologist who did research into paranormal stuff. It sounded wild and straight up out of a fantasy book, but I loved it, and soon I began to believe in it. My grandma also told me stories about ghosts and demons and other creatures, and that there were ones who lived in the house. At first, I was a bit afraid, but my grandma told me that there isn't anything to be scared of. But I had to follow some rules. There was a room which belonged to my grandpa. He used it for studies. In this room and the cellar, I was not allowed. A few weeks passed by, and I got used to the beautiful and slightly creepy house. But I always had the feeling that somebody was watching me. Soon, I began to see things. Shadows and little movements. It creeped me out in the beginning, but my grandma told me that I have nothing to be afraid of. It's just Thomas. Thomas was a ghost who was haunting the house. She told me that he lived in here and had passed away many years ago, that he was harmless, and if I should see him, I can greet him, and that it would make him happy to do so. And she was right. Thomas was very harmless. But soon I saw other things. Not all of them were nice and friendly. I remember my first encounter with one of the entities that scared me for real. It was my first summer with my grandma and aunt. My aunt had a big and very friendly dog called Teddy. And we played in the backyard of the house. On a very hot day, my aunt said that she would get us something to drink. Teddy followed my aunt everywhere, so he went with her inside, and I waited outside. Near the house, there was a little forest. I remember that I stared for a while in the direction of it, and then I saw someone come out. At first, I thought that it was a hiker, but the person didn't look like that. It was a very tall man who wore a black coat, a black scarf, and a hat. I couldn't see his face very much, and his clothing didn't match up with the hot weather. He must have been really hot. He came straight up to our yard and stopped right before the fence. He didn't do anything, he just stared in my direction. And then he called my name. I know that this sounds unbelievable, but I know what I saw and what I heard. He waved at me and called my name over and over again. His voice sounded smooth and kind. And I don't know why, but I wanted to go closer. And then suddenly, Teddy ran past me and barked at the man. Teddy was a very friendly dog who was happy to get pets from every visitor. But that day he behaved differently. The barks were aggressive and he growled. It was like he wanted to protect me. My aunt ran out of the house too as soon as she heard Teddy's barking, and I remember how I turned around to her. She was confused because it was the first time she'd ever seen her dog like that. She asked me what happened, and I told her that there was this strange man all in black. But when I turned around, the man was gone. And by gone, I mean he had vanished into thin air. We couldn't see him anymore. He could have gone into the forest, but that's impossible, because there is no way he could have been that fast that we couldn't see him anymore. Teddy stared for a while into the forest and growled silently. My aunt tried to shut him up, but for the first time he didn't listen. She then asked me again, who was this man? I told her what I saw and what I heard, and although she hadn't seen him, she got really scared. We went inside the house and my aunt checked the back garden more than once through the windows. I was scared too. I didn't know this man, but he knew my name, and then his strange clothing choice. It was a weird and creepy moment, but it doesn't end there. After that, every now and then, I could hear this man. He called me even when I was inside, and it seemed like only I could hear it, nobody else. I got nightmares out of nowhere. I woke up with scratches over my arms. There were cold spots in the house. Teddy started behaving weird. He began to look in corners where there was nothing. He barked and growled aggressively. And there was already something paranormal about the house, and Teddy was used to stuff like that, so this was weird. My grandma noticed pretty quickly that there was something wrong, and she and her daughters had a talk about what they should do. My mother wanted to leave, but there was nowhere that we could go. My grandma, on the other hand, decided to solve the problem in her own way. She prepared some rituals and spells and other magical stuff. And, well, she solved the problem pretty quickly, but before that, there was a night that I cannot forget. It was a Saturday, and we watched TV, and suddenly loud noises came from upstairs. They sounded like heavy footsteps. Teddy began to immediately growl. We didn't make a move. We just listened. The steps got faster, and it sounded like someone was running. My mother took me in her arms. She was so afraid. I think we all were, though my grandma didn't show it. The noises stopped for a moment, and then we heard them going down the stairs. My grandma immediately stood up and went out of the living room. I heard her saying things. I don't remember what she said, but it sounded like she was threatening someone, or in this case, something. And then the smooth voice began to call my name again. But this time, we all heard it. Teddy's growling got progressively louder, and the words of my grandma got more and more aggressive. And then, out of nowhere, it became quiet. And then, out of nowhere, it became quiet. For the next part of the story, to give you a better understanding, I have to mention the door to the cellar isn't far away from the living room. The next few minutes were very quiet. My grandma mumbled something, and then we thought that it was over. But then there was a loud knocking coming from the cellar door. The door was locked, and it sounded like someone was trapped in there. And then the knocking was followed by loud, creepy laughter. I can remember it clearly today, and it still scares me and brings tears to my eyes. To this day, I am afraid of this voice, of this laughter and the banging. But luckily, I have never heard it again after that night. I've never seen that strange man again. I didn't sleep at all that night, and the next few nights were restless. But after that, my life went back to normal again. Just my grandma, my aunt, her dog, my mum, a few friendly ghosts, and me. Over the years, occultism and paranormal things became a hobby for me. It runs in the family. I had been hoping to find out who or what this man was. An evil ghost? A demon? Something else? I really don't know. But to be honest, I don't know if I want to know the truth about this thing. The only thing that I know is that this man was dangerous. It wasn't like Thomas, whose worst habit was to toss things down if he was in a bad mood. And a few years ago, I, for the first time, saw the cellar of the house. I had been hoping that maybe there was something down there that was somehow connected to this entity because it had vanished into the cellar. Sadly, it wasn't that exciting, just old and useless stuff. Nothing paranormal, but I was still scared. I can tell you that. Well, that's it. One of my few paranormal experiences. And again, if you don't believe me, that's okay. I've been called a weirdo more than once because of it. I'm used to it. Anyway, I hope for some of you this story was interesting, and have a good day.
Over 10 years on, and I can't explain it. Submitted by user thehaunt90 to r/ghoststories. I've never really told this story. It could be nothing, but I still think about it. This is a true story. My friend's dad had this huge house that was about 200 years old. I want to say it was Victorian, but I'm not certain, but it was old. It had 4 floors: basement, ground floor, first floor, and second floor, the attic. I was staying over for the second time. The first time I was incredibly drunk, so I passed out on her bedroom floor. My friend's room was the attic room, and I was staying in the room opposite of hers. It was one of the spare rooms, but this room was more of a junk room with bunk beds, whereas the spare rooms were actual rooms. The night was normal, watched some movies, messed around in the basement, which had a pool table, and eventually went up to bed. I never had any weird feelings about being in that house until I was in the attic room by myself. Immediately, when I was on my own, I felt incredibly uneasy. If you've ever experienced that feeling, you'll know exactly what I mean, and I couldn't shake it, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't fall asleep. I wanted to leave the room, but I was too terrified to move, and I didn't know why. Hours had gone by, and I was still awake and hadn't moved, and then I heard running up and down the stairs that led to the attic. I just froze and tried to hold my breath, but being a logical person, I explained it to myself. Then, not long after, I heard fast erratic knocking on the wall my bed was against, and my face was inches from. That was something I couldn't explain because the staircase wasn't joined to that wall. It was joined to my friend's bedroom. You couldn't reach across and bang on the wall, and there was at least a 10 feet drop down to the other set of stairs. There's no way someone could bang on that wall. It all suddenly stopped, but I still had that feeling of unease. I must have eventually managed to fall asleep, because the next thing I know, I am woken by more running and more knocking. But this time, it was followed by what sounded like children giggling. There were no children in this house. It was just me, 20, my friend and her boyfriend, both 23, and her dad. At this point, I started crying. I have never been so scared before in my life. I just waited for the sun to come up. When I heard my friend was up in the morning, I got out of that room quick as I could and tried to sound as rational as I could when I told my friend. Turns out unexplained things have happened before. The room between the hall and the kitchen had hardwood floors that was being varnished, so the adjoining doors were closed and locked. Then, when they went in the next day, there were footprints that went toward the bookcase and disappeared. I didn't believe her, but she showed me, and you could faintly see the footprints on the floor. I still didn't believe her, but her dad confirmed the story too, and he wasn't a believer in the paranormal. Then, he proceeded to tell me that the land that their neighbor's house is on was once owned by the people who originally owned their 200-year-old house. When the neighbor's house foundations were being dug out in the 70s, they found 2 remains of children dating back to the 1800s or 1900s. I'm not making this shit up, and I thought they were messing with me because of what happened to me, but they showed me the newspaper cutouts from when it happened. They had found creepy stuff in the walls in the attic too. Packet of cigarettes, notes that were unreadable, and some stuff in the basement too. It was the most unexplained and creepy experience of my life, and I refused to go up to that attic room again. I did stay over once after that, but I stayed on the sofa downstairs with her cousin.
Thank you all for watching. If you want to find the original stories or the voice actors that read them, the links are in the description down below. If you like this sort of content, we will be posting Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. All of this is being done for free and by a small independent team, so be sure to show some love. I hope you all stay creepy, stay safe, and have a gay day.